Okay, welcome everyone. Got another great group tonight. That's because we have a great class and a great host, I'm sure. So we're all really excited to have you guys here. Hope everyone is bundled up. It's getting very cold in Austin. We were just looking at the forecast, and like Sunday and Monday and Tuesday are kind of scary. So bundle up, stay warm. I am Denise Silverman. I'm the executive director of the Wine and Food Foundation. My colleague Hillary Weldy is our senior director of events. She's here with us tonight, and she is the one who puts all of these together. Today, we are super excited for a new class called Yin and Yang, a regional head-to-head of two classic grapes with our friend Mark Rashap. Mark, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So before we get started, just a couple quick notes. We've got some new Imbibe series up and open for registration. Next week, Wednesday, February 17th, is a great class called Old School Natural Wines, hosted by Patrick Olds from McGuire Mormon and Tony Schlatzauer from Jeffries. So we're really excited about that. That's a new topic for us. And then the following week, Wednesday, February 24th, we're doing a Passion for Douro, the wines of Quinta de Crasto. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Every time I read it, I thought it was a typo because it's very, very odd spelling. And Mandy Nelson is going to be hosting us that night. We are working on some other event plans, as I've told you guys, and those will be as it starts to warm up in the spring months. Some outdoor, small, COVID compliant events. So we'll be keeping you posted on those. Again, the Rare and Fine Wine Auction is locked in for Saturday, November 6th. So mark your calendar for that date, and we'll be keeping you posted on registration there. Also, the foundation is celebrating Black History Month this month. Last week, we focused on Black-owned restaurants in Austin on our social media, and we've got some other stuff coming up, so be on the lookout for that. And if you have other ideas on ways we can celebrate Black History Month in the hospitality space, let us know. We'll tag you on our post if you have something you think we should be sharing. And we'll also be looking to next month to focus on Women's History Month, so be on the lookout for that as well. And today we had a really great and fun announcement. We announced our 2021 Board of Directors. So we have a new slate of officers this year. Jerry Valdez, who couldn't be with us tonight, is our president. Amber Pierce is our president-elect. Frederick Osterberg is our treasurer, and Sansi Chin is our secretary. And then a huge thanks to our friend, Pat Conroy, otherwise known as Paco, for his term as president and all the support he gave us during that time. He's here with us tonight. And then we also have 5 new board members that we announced. We have, I think, 2 of them here with us tonight. Sergio Amaya is a new board member. And I thought I saw Mary sign on. Oh, there she is. Hi. Mary and Greg are here. Mary Robinson is a new board member for us. So we're excited about that. We announced that on social media today and got a lot of great engagement. So check those out when you get a chance. Okay, lastly, we are going to do something new and fun tonight. You guys are our test case. We're going to do something at the end of class called the last sip. And the point of it is really to just ask you guys for what is your number one takeaway from tonight's class. And it doesn't have to be like super like serious or anything. If you did learn something amazing and exciting and you want to say, you know, this is something new I learned tonight, that's great. Or if you want to share, you know, if someone had an interesting and silly anecdote that you just thought was really funny and that's what you're going to remember about tonight, that's fine. But we want to hear from you guys and see what you guys enjoyed about this class and what is your biggest takeaway. So that's what the last sip is, and we'll be doing that before we sign off tonight and after everyone has had a few glasses of wine and is ready to have some fun. So with that, I am super excited to turn it over to our host, Mark Rashap, for Yin and Yang.
Yeah, thank you. Always a treat to do these. So thank you so much for taking the time. This is a fun class. I think that we will, we're going to start, and I'm going to talk just a few minutes about perceiving wine, because learning how to delve and to tap the finer points of how to learn about wine and actually how to improve, because no matter how great of a wine taster you are or how much you know, you actually can always improve. I mean, Olympic athletes still have room to improve. So I want to talk a little bit about that and what is wine perception and why do we taste and why do we taste in comparison, which is something that I feel like you have to do to learn about wine or to increase your knowledge base. And then we'll delve into the wines. We'll talk about Riesling and two very distinct regions of Germany, and then Sangiovese, which are two wines that are new to the Broadbent portfolio. So it's going to be fun. I'm going to try to wrap up our actual meat of the class by 8, and so, or I'm sorry, 7 your time. I'm on the East Coast, so in and out, 50 minutes, and then we can ask questions and we can hang out and we can do all that. And if you need to cut out, then no worries. All right. I think most of you have had have sat in classes of mine before, and I'm a huge proponent of tasting comparatively. And the reason that is that our nose and our smell, our olfaction, is the least developed of all of our senses, and so and we don't really talk about that so much. If you hear a ballet, if you hear like a ballad and versus a rock song, I mean, we are hearing these drastically different things, and we can pinpoint, we have words to pinpoint what those are. If you look at somebody's face versus another face, our visual perception is very well trained to identify differences. But those differences, we are not perceiving a visual image or sound. We are not perceiving those things with our eyes or our ears. We are perceiving them with our brain. So our eyes are just the apparatus to change light and color into electrical signals that then our brain perceives. Our nose does the same exact thing. So if you smell roses, there's a molecule that will then attach to a receptor in our nose, and it will send that receptor to our brain, or that it will send a signal to our brain saying that that is the aroma in roses. So I hear all the time that, like, my nose, I just know whether I like it or I don't. And I just know whether, I can't determine between one aroma or, roses versus, or tarragon versus this or that. And it's just my nose. People say that. And really it's not, I kind of always push back on that a little bit. It's really the training of paying attention to the aroma or paying attention to what you are perceiving, and then being able to distinguish it in your brain. And we do not practice that hardly ever with our nose. We are practicing it all the time with our eyes. Every time you look at something, you're saying, oh, well, that's something different than that. And that's how we navigate through life. But we don't have to do that with our nose. So anyway, the point is that when you taste comparatively, you are highlighting differences, and then you're paying attention to those, and hopefully you are putting words into those differences. Another really handy trick, and I'm kind of bringing this up because I'm in New Jersey right now, called away on family stuff, and I'm not actually tasting the wines, but I have a very good mental image about what they taste like. And that is something that I've really practiced, and I can, you can always get better and you can always practice more. But if you, I think it's a really good exercise in smelling a wine, and then later, tasting a wine, and then later that night when you're going to bed, can you recall what it actually tastes like in your brain? And then the next day, can you recall what that wine was that you tasted yesterday in your brain? And the better that you become at this, then can you recall what that wine tasted like a year ago? And that is how you become an amazing taster. So most amazing tasters are not smart in their nose, but they're smart in their brain. So anyway, that is that. If you have any questions on on that, let me know. I could talk all day about sensory perception. I love it. Also, what's interesting, here's a little bit of an aside, but when you smell something, your eyes go to a certain area. So when you smell strawberries, your eyes will actually naturally go into a certain area. And if you change your eye position, like forcefully change your eye position, you will actually smell the aroma less. And you can kind of take this to an extreme, and I see Greg doing it, is if you smell the wine, and then move your eyes into a very awkward position, like all the way up, and you will not be able to smell anything. So anyway, it's a very, very interesting idea in cognitive sciences. Okay, let's delve into. So I wanted to choose two really fantastic grape varieties, and two grape varieties that are somewhat misunderstood. So so let's delve in. And as always with my classes, we'll have some fun. We'll tell some jokes. We'll look at maps. There's going to be a lot of maps. And so yeah, and I like what Hillary says. Do not tell me it smells sweet, because that is true. You cannot smell sweet. Sweetness is your taste is one of your five tastes, and then and your nose is going to be smelling any number of 15 to 30,000 different aromas, and then your mind puts together what the tastes are and the smell. And that's fantastic, Hillary. I taught you well, I think. Not it's your doing. It's not mine. All right. Let's go into this here. Okay. So a brief thing. So when I left the Wine and Food Foundation a couple years ago and started working for a pretty prominent company called Broadbent Selections. So a lot of people knew that the gentleman below is Michael Broadbent, one of the most famous people in 20th century wine. He passed away this past year in 2020, but he wrote a weekly decanter column for over 40 years. So one of the most prolific wine writers, and his son Bartholomew started Broadbent Selections in the US. And the reason I say that is because, just delving into this, Bartholomew was a port export and Madeira expert, and he started to travel around the US teaching and reintroducing port and Madeira in the 1980s. And actually, then he started an importership. And then he started, obviously with port and Madeira, but then he also started introducing other producers. And so his first non-port and Madeira producer was the first wine that you are having, the Louis Guntram. So Constantin Guntram was his first, foray outside of port and Madeira. So anyway, the philosophy was always to pick like what he thought was the top producer in each region. And so, we typically only represent one producer from each prominent region around the world. So Constantin Guntram, I want to just talk a little bit about German wine here for a second, before we kind of delve in, and we can start taking, I hope that you are tasting, I'm not going to be so, I feel like with virtual classes, just go ahead and taste both of them. We will take a moment to just talk about subtle flavor differences and what to kind of what everybody is perceiving in the glasses, but go and enjoy the wines and hopefully enjoy. I hope that you like maps just as much as me. So I'm not sure that that's possible. So okay, so we have the majority of German wine region is in just the south, the southwest here. And this is where the 98% of all the wine. There are a few regions out over here, but they are really, really not that important. Quality is not great, and there's really not that much land. So really, we're talking about in the southwest quadrant. Here you have like Strasbourg in France, so that's kind of there. This is Alsace, and so one of the main features that you kind of talk about with German wine is the Rhine River. So if we look on the other side here, the Rhine River is going to go all pretty much through wine country like this and split it down the middle. The Mosel is maybe the most famous for like really collectible wine. It has a very long tradition and it's very windy. So the Dr. Herman is actually going to be from the middle Mosel here. And some very famous vineyards in the Erden little town village. You have Erzig and Erden are two villages that Dr. Herman gets his grapes from. Okay, other areas to know. What else? If you were to, if a lot of people have a hard time with German wine, and I get it. There's a lot of like tough sounding names. It's like typically mostly Riesling or other grapes that nobody cares about. And then just kidding. But let me pick out the few things that are really interesting about German wine. In the very far north, does anybody know what the R is most famous for? It's actually most famous for Pinot Noir. So you would think that Pinot might not be as cool climate than Riesling, but it is a little bit further north. But nevertheless, it's a little bit lower lying, and you don't have the steep slopes that you have in the Mosel. So the R is famous for Pinot Noir. Excellent Pinots. The Mosel, we're going to talk about kind of in depth there. Here, one of my favorite areas is this green area. It just didn't fit into this class, but that is called the Rheingau. And that is some really, really famous high-end single vineyard Rieslings. The Rheinhessen here is famous for a particular soil that we're going to look at, that the Louis Guntram is famous for. And then the Pfalz and the Nahe, and that's how you pronounce that, the Nahe, N-A-H-E, are famous for kind of like avant-garde younger producers. Like you don't have to have vineyards in your family for generations to be, to be kind of forging that area. So like producers like Dunhoff and, a number of other kind of hot producers are in those general vicinities. Any questions on that? Like these Württemberg, all the rest, you don't really have to know to actually understand German wine to a pretty high degree. So we are comparing two different Riesling, and the reason that I chose these is that the Louis Guntram is from a very famous soil that's a red iron soil called Rotter Hang. And that is, so Rotter Hang means the red slopes. And if we kind of go across, if you kind of see, these are the vineyards here in Nierstein. You can see the red clay, right? You can kind of see that red iron rich tinge to it. And so those are what are called the red slopes. And it's not as steep as the Mosel, as you can see. But you do get some pretty steep plots. It's pretty beautiful, isn't it? I think it's pretty awesome. And then the Dr. Herman and Riesling is a real conduit of the soil that it grows in. So, so when we were kind of talking about Finger Lakes Riesling, and it's, there's a lot of variety, a lot of different soils. There's almost not like a full regional identity. At least I don't kind of think of that. But these two regions in the Rheinhessen, so that's the Guntram, outside of the village of Nierstein, that there's a very particular soil. And then with Dr. Herman, they have the blue slate soils of the Mosel. This is what the Mosel is famous for. And when it rains, it like smells like waterfalls and like and spice gardens. That's what Erziger Wirtsgarten means, spice garden, and it really does smell like spices when right after it rains in that vineyard. Let's taste. Any comments? These are the cellars of Louis Guntram. So Louis Guntram has been around since the 1600s. So there's 11th generation winemaker now, Konstantin Guntram, I had said. And actually, really, really interesting is that during World War II, General Patton, so it was they're at a very strategic point on the Rhine River, and there's the winery down there. And this was a photo taken during World War II. You could see the ships. They actually built a bridge from the winery, and General Patton and his troops actually occupied the Guntram winery, stayed there, drank most of the wine, and they used it as their and they fought. Then they crossed the river at Guntram and then started their conquest, fighting the Nazis. And there's some wild pictures, like you see this almost inflatable bridge. You don't see it in this photo, but I've seen like bridges, like the bridge that goes across, and there's like planes that are flying over, and it was really a hot spot of fighting during World War II, which is super cool. Yeah, let's see, let's taste any comments. We've got some yeah, okay. Got some comments. There's really not much of a retail presence on this wine, but would love to talk about it. Yeah, so small producer. The Guntram is actually made. The dry Guntram is made with no oak, whereas the Dr. Herman, actually the Trocken that we have, spends about a year in large oval foudre, and then it's bottled and minimally filtered, all native yeast. The Guntram is all stainless steel. So when I think about these two wines, and would love any feedback as well, but for me, the Guntram is kind of like a little bit more linear, kind of really direct. The Rotterhang soils give a little bit more opulence, and the minerality is really nice and fresh. For me, the Dr. Herman is like classic Mosel, to where you have like the slate and the diesel quality. Some people might really be turned off about that. For me, when I get in trouble with my wife, I need to get Shannon, my wife, loves the diesely, oily, slatey quality that you get in that Dr. Herman. 2017 was a really great vintage in the Mosel, and so yeah. Any feedback? Any feedback? Shannon's always right, Mary.
Yeah, there's some good comments in here. A lot about the acidity, and I actually really noticed this, like the acidity and the citrus in the Dr. Herman. Like, just feel it right back here as soon as you take a sip.
Yeah. So okay. So this is an interesting debate, and I'm going to touch on it. We're not going to get too much into it because it'll take all night. But the way that you perceive sweetness is actually a ratio or a proportion of the acid. So if you have let's say, so with normal wine, like not Riesling, but like most white wines, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Vermentino, Viognier, all this kind of stuff, they might have if you taste a residual sugar if you taste residual sugar, it's probably, at around 5 grams per liter of residual sugar or more. Does that make sense? So like 5 grams for most wines, for most red and white wines, is the threshold to where you will perceive it. So some people are better at perceiving residual sugar than others. But typically it is thought, if you are really good at perceiving residual sugar, you will perceive it at 2 grams per liter of residual sugar and greater. Then you can taste that there's sugar and it's not a dry wine. Most people are at around 5 grams per liter of residual sugar. But with Riesling, since the acid is so high, you don't taste the sugar as much. Does that make sense? Like if you have a vinaigrette dressing that's very acidic and you put a little sugar, you put the sugar in to balance it out, and you don't taste that it's sugary, you don't taste that it's sweet, but it just like makes it just right. And so Riesling, the threshold for dry or Trocken, so in the bottle of Dr. Herman, you'll see the word Riesling Trocken. Trocken in German means dry. Do not confuse that with Trockenbeeren Auslese, which means dried grapes, which means that they're sweet. Does that make sense? That when the grapes are dried out, it's a dessert wine. So Trucken Beerenauslese is one of the sweetest versions. It's like next up to ice wine. And so in that situation, Trucken means the grapes are dried, not that the wine is dry. But if you just see Riesling Trucken, that means that it's dry. I'm confusing everybody, aren't I? I'm failing at this. Okay, I'm not. I'm seeing some people who are grabbing what I'm putting down. So good. So Riesling Trucken, it's dry, but it's you might have a little bit more sugar than what you would normally think of as having sugar in a Chardonnay or a Vermentino or something like this. One of my favorite things, I was out in Lubbock and I was tasting, I don't know if folks know, but of course everybody knows Kim McPherson from McPherson Cellars. His wife owns a restaurant. And so, when I was going out to Lubbock and I was trying to sell his wife some wine, he was around, and I was pouring one of these Dr. Herman wines, and the Dr. Herman had some, it was pretty dry, and I was like, Kim, you're a winemaker, you can tell like residual sugar, right? You can tell how much residual sugar it has, and he was like, I think that it's got, 6 grams per liter of residual sugar. And I was like, no, the acid is so high that it had 12 grams of double the amount of sugar that he thought. Anyway, he couldn't stop talking about that the whole conversation. So the point is, I guess, is that the higher the acidity, the less you perceive the sweetness. So the Dr. Herman actually has 6 grams per liter, which would normally be above the sensory threshold. So 6 grams per liter on the Dr. Herman, and actually 7 grams per liter on the Guntram. So, but those are technically dry in terms of Riesling. Cool? Groovy? Favorites? Great. 17's good vintage, and I hope that you like the regions. There's not a whole lot of there's not many producers that you can get in the U.S. that have grapes on that very famous iron soils, the Rotterhang, and so that's kind of fun. Paco is saying Weisswein in a stein from a giant keg. So Weisswein, it probably was mostly Pinot Blanc. Weissburgunder is Pinot Blanc in terms of grapes with their German synonyms. Somebody's saying Dr. Herman has too much diesel. I totally get it, but when you have the Dr. Herman compared, you'll never not be able to sense or to perceive that diesel. So groovy. Shall we talk some Sangiovese? Any questions on? I will say, like when you compare, these dry Riesling to Rieslings from Alsace, the Alsatian Rieslings tend to have a little bit more body and texture. They tend to be a little bit fatter, and a lot higher alcohol compared to these wines. I think it's also important when we're talking about dry Rieslings to mention a term that is really, really hot and in vogue and sexy right now, and that is GGs. So GGs mean grosse Gewachs or grosse Gewächs, and that means that it is basically a Grand Cru site that is fermented dry. So there's a big kind of movement right now to rate the vineyards in Germany, kind of like you have in Burgundy, to where you have Grand Cru vineyards or Grosse Lagen and Premier Cru vineyards, which are Erste Lagen, and then a dry wine from a Grosse Lagen vineyard is a GG. So for me, I love dry Riesling. Whenever I see GGs on the shelf, I try to buy them or collect them because I love that. It can get expensive, but it's worth it. these are like world-class wines, and they are, compared to Burgundy prices, they're like a steal. So anyway, so that's a good way to, if you like dry Riesling but you don't know how to identify it, then GGs are the way to go. Any questions on Riesling? I mean, there's so much to cover. Let me know as I have a sip and wet my throat, if there's any questions, and then we'll move on to Sangiovese. All right. Classic head-to-head here of Sangiovese. Oh, and having Riesling after the red wines, it's always good to go back. The acidity just like cleans your palate. Somebody's asking GG. Okay, it's really it's not spelling. It's the abbreviation instead of, so grosse Gewachs is the great. So grosse Gewachs. So grosse means great, and Gewachs is sight. So that's what GG means. Since nobody can pronounce grosse Gewachs, then you just say GG. And you would probably expect to pay. Like, there's not really any in the 30s. You would probably expect to pay like $40 and up, but never really more than like 80. They're in that like they're in that kind of sweet spot of like high-end wine, but these are world-class wines that you're not, where if you, I mean, you can't buy Grand Cru Burgundy for less than $200. So, it's kind of a good deal, I think. All right. And both of these producers, the Dr. Herman and the Louis Guntram, make grosse Gewachs. So beautiful. All right, let's get back into this. Oh, shoot. There's some pictures. All right, I lied. We're gonna look a little bit more at some vineyards before, just because they're beautiful. We can come back to, if people have questions on the Mosel's geography, we can kind of come back to that. But here are all of the vineyards. Oh, I'll show you this. So the Dr. Herman is really from this area right here between Erden and Erzig, and that is this is where Dr. Herman owns his vineyards, and so you've got like Erzger Wirtsgarten is right here. Some of the grapes come from there. Erdener Treppchen, some grapes come from there. So anyway, that's what we're dealing with. And then if we go, just seeing some of these are just the Mosel, along with the Douro, and are some of the steepest vineyards in the world. I mean, it's just remarkable. All right. Shifting gears to Sangiovese, I backtracked just so you had time to pour the two Sangioveses, and it was intentional, right? So we are tasting actually first. If you're to taste, if you're tasting, I had it incorrect in the morning when we sent out the email. Taste the Chianti first, and then the Rosso di Montalcino. So here we are in Tuscany. So the way that Italy breaks up their regions is actually called, so each of these, Piedmont or Piemonte, Tuscany, Liguria, Emilia-Romagna, all of these are what the Italians called regione. So if you have, so if you see just like Toscana, it could come from the entire region. Like in the US, we have states. In Spain, they have autonomías. In Italy, they have regione, regions. And then each region is broken up into provincias. So provinces are a sub-region of the regione. And then a sub-region of the provinces are the communes. So why do I mention this? And I do think it is important. but so here you have the Toscana is the region. If you look on the right-hand side, this is the entire province of Siena. So Siena is a subsection of Tuscany, and then each of these are kind of communes. So it does make a it is important, because even if you're talking about Chianti, you can even distinguish between the subregions in Chianti, like Rada in Chianti, Greve. All of these are pretty important wines. The Sangiovese, the La Boncia, the wine that you're tasting, the Chianti, is actually right here in the far south, and it's actually just across the border of Chianti Classico. And so it doesn't sit in the Chianti Classico zone, it sits in just the regular general Chianti zone. So I hope that is, so that's why it says just Chianti DOCG instead of Chianti Classico. But really, actually, part of the farm, part of that estate of Bindi Sergardi is, so part of that same farm is in the Chianti Classico zone, and part of it is just in the generic Chianti zone. Hope that is clear. Let's kind of move on. As we're looking at this, I want to just show you kind of what we're dealing with in terms of Tuscany. So Tuscany, the whole generic region, right? And then Chianti Classico is right in between Florence and Siena. And then, as you can see here, there's an area outside of Siena called Colli Senesi. So that is a subregion of the generic Chianti zone, but it's kind of more delineated between Colli Senesi, and that's in the south. And then there's 7 other Chianti zones. I always hear the story, everybody always goes to Italy, and then they're talking with some local, and the local says, only buy the wine with the rooster. That's the real one. And everything else is like bogus. And I'm just baffled by this, because it's kind of a fallacy. It's just a misunderstanding. The rooster is the emblem of the Chianti Classico zone, and so that is the most historic part of the Chianti zone. But it's not to say that there are good, like very dynamic and exciting farms that are outside of the Classico zone. And particularly, sometimes there's really great quality for value. As an example, if you're a farm and you're just outside of Siena, like to the northwest here, you can't call it Chianti Classico, but does that mean that nobody should buy your wine and you should only buy the grapes coming from the Chianti Classico zone? No, So anyway, that's kind of my 2 cents on the rooster story. The rooster story is fun. We can get into that if people want to know. But anyway, the rooster is just an emblem of the Chianti Classico producers, of the consortium. If we could look at here, Brunello di Montalcino. So this is going to come in handy when we're talking about the Campana, which is, so Brunello di Montalcino is in the far south. And then another really notable region is Montepulciano. So Vino Nobile di Montepulciano. So those are really kind of the most important kind of subzones there in Tuscany. Any questions on the, as we get into the tasting, any questions on like geography of Tuscany? You're further south here in Brunello, it's warmer, and it's a little bit lower elevation as well. On a general whole, it's lower elevation. So, you do get a little bit more ripeness and richness in the wines from Montalcino. All right, let's move on here. I'm not able to, I'm in a pretty small computer, so I'm not monitoring the comments the whole time. So anyway, Sangiovese, 150,000 acres, and 155,000 acres. And Sangiovese as well really changes depending on what soils and what subregion. Sangiovese has a very, very different character by elevation as well. So higher elevation Sangiovese, that's kind of like really the talk of the town right now, particularly in Montalcino, and we'll see that. But there's a big difference between lower lying vineyards of Sangiovese and higher elevation vineyards of Sangiovese. This is interesting. Sangiovese was often blended with different varieties. Both of these wines are 100% Sangiovese, but historically in Chianti, there was a mandatory blending because Sangiovese could be so tough that they needed other grape varieties to kind of round out the mouthfeel. This was before that they had it was before they had kind of more advanced viticulture techniques, then they could really ripen year to year. If you're underripe, the tannins are going to be too tough, and it's going to be, it needs something to soften it up, or with age. And that was why, you kind of needed to age Sangiovese a little bit longer. Chianti Classico, it still has to be 80% or more Sangiovese. It can be blended. The big thing nowadays is to blend Sangiovese with Syrah, which that softens it up and it gives it a little bit more color, a little bit more appropriate for kind of the new world taste profiles and sensibilities. But Brunello di Montalcino or Rosso di Montalcino has to be 100% Sangiovese. I just want to kind of point out that in Montalcino, Sangiovese is kind of known as Sangiovese Grosso, and Grosso doesn't mean like a larger bunch. It means just like kind of a greater quality. And then in the town, the Vino Nobile di Montepulciano, the synonym is Prugnolo Gentile. So that's that. I just kind of want to point out this, and I say this because I think some of the best, highest quality wines from Sangiovese, one of the most exciting things is right now at the top of the pyramid of quality. The top of the pyramid of quality here is what's called Gran Selezione, and these wines are from Chianti Classico, and it was introduced in 2010, so it's still a relatively new category of Sangiovese, but it has to be aged for 30 months. It's kind of like a competitor to Brunello di Montalcino. And so these were introduced in 2010, and I still think that there's some of the most exciting wines being made.
Hey, Mark,
yeah.
Speaking of Brunello, so Pat's asking about the difference between Rosso and Brunello.
Yeah, let's do it. That's a good question. It's the next slide here. So when we look at, first of all, Brunello has to be from, so here we look at it. Brunello, it has to be from the commune of Montalcino. And so along with just the geographical area, it has to come from certified vineyards within the Montalcino commune. Okay, that's number one. It has to have lower yields than most other wines, meaning less grapes per vineyard, and then therefore the thought is that it's a higher quality. So actually, Rosso di Montalcino, it has to be at least 12 months in barrel and then not released. So it can be actually bottled and released pretty quickly after that. But you typically see Rosso di Montalcino in barrel for 12 months. And then Brunello di Montalcino must by law be 2 years in barrel and not released until it has 5 years of age on it. Is that clear? Because that's kind of an interesting thing. So what we're seeing, a lot of producers actually go above and beyond what they have to do by law, but that's the law. So Brunello must be a minimum of 2 years in oak, and then before they release it, it has to be at least 5 years old. The classic producers, and so the producer that you're tasting, the Rosso di Montalcino, it's Capanna. one of the first producers in Montalcino. It's very new to Texas. It's only been available in Texas for about 4 or 5 months, three or 4 months. So it's a new producer. Broadbent Selections just took them on last year, and they've only been, we've only had it in Texas for a few months. And they were one of the first producers. So they were one of the founding families of the consortium of Montalcino in the 1960s, 1958. And so anyway, they're a very classic producer. They age their Brunello in wood for 3 years. And so that means that they could release the wine after, so 3 years in oak in big barrels, and then they only have to age it in bottle for 2 years before it's released to the market. Whereas the Rosso di Montalcino, they age it for 12. So this wine that you're tasting here, 12 months in barrel, and then another 12 months in bottle after before they release it to the market. But it can be, but as you can see here, the Rosso di Montalcino by law only has to be held until the September 1st, the year after the harvest. Does that make sense, Pat? Does that clarify that? Let me see all y'all's beautiful faces here.
We do have another question, Mark. Julie, this one kind of
great.
How do you train your brain to better identify what you're smelling?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is to smell the yeah, that's a great question. So, the big thing is to to isolate the aromas. So with Sangiovese in particular, and I always think that this is good for living and life too. Like when I have a bunch of tomatoes, with the vine and all that, and I'm a terrible gardener, but my wife is a good gardener, and so like she'll pull me out and she'll be like, "Oh, look at these tomatoes, are doing really well." And you stop and you smell the tomatoes and you think, "All right, tomato vine, that's the the green component along with the tomatoes," and then you file that away. And then can you think about that night, what did those tomato vines smell like? The next day, the day after that, can you still smell those tomato vines, and is that different than the fruit of the tomato? And then can you smell the roses? And then can you remember what roses smell like? Can you smell like an earthiness? So I would say that, it's very easy, and I'll tell you right now, Sangiovese, classic Sangiovese, is precisely what I just said. Roses, fresh tomatoes on the vine, and earth. And maybe some citrus, maybe some like orange peel, orange zest. And so the way that you train yourself is by tasting all of those aromas separately in life, and just enjoying life in that capacity. And then when you're presented with a glass, think to yourself, okay, do I smell roses, or do I smell violets? And so typically though, so Sangiovese grown in the Chianti zone is Sangiovese grown in the Chianti zone. You typically get a little bit more fresh red fruit, like the and red flower, so roses as opposed to violets. Typically in Montalcino, you'll get a little bit more darker fruit as opposed to the really fresh cherries. In the Montalcino wine, you're going to get maybe, and that depends on vintage too. If it's a hot vintage, you're going to get more of a dried fruit, more kind of stewed fruit quality, as opposed to a really cool vintage where you're going to get a little bit fresher fruit. But no matter what, typically wines from the Chianti zone are going to be a little bit brighter, cherries, red cherries instead of black cherries. You're going to get more rose quality, and then you're going to get that like a very kind of savory spice to them. And then in the Montalcino zone, you're going to get more of a darker spice, a little licorice, darker fruit, more power, more tannin, and that all that kind of stuff. I hope that kind of explains things a little bit. I love the La Boncia, the Chianti is great with a little bit of a chill on it. It's really, really got pretty aromatics. It's got tons of acidity. Sangiovese is one of the highest acid red grapes, and it just kind of makes you salivate. And it's a dynamite food wine. So the higher the acidity, the more it's going to go with cheeses, the more it's going to go cut through tomato sauces, right? Because tomato sauce is pretty acidic. So you need a wine that has enough acidity to kind of cut through and still have your mouth, you know, fresh and lively. Yeah, hey, somebody said I feel like the acidity links the reds and whites in this tasting. Yeah, high acid. Both of the both categories are high acid, so I agree with that. Yeah. Oh, let me show you. We do have. Let's see here. So I do want to show you a few more things. Here's the majority of soils of the Tuscan area. So Galestro is kind of like a clay and sandstone quality, and then this is like kind of the money. This is the money soil, the limestone soil of Tuscany. It's called Albarese, and that is so Bindi Sergardi has a fair amount of Albarese on their property, and as well as Capana, and then you have this hard blue and gray sandstone. This is Macigno is the name of this soil. Those are the three soils. The Bindi Sergardi, really, really remarkable. This producer, they've been making wine since 1349 for 23 generations. They actually were, so their home estate is where this wine comes from, La Boncia. It's just out north of Siena, and they were one of the first 13 nobles of Siena. So like their coat of arms is like the original nobility of Siena. So remarkable. And this Alessandra is now the owner. So she's the 23rd generation. And she hired as winemakers really, really some famous single, winemakers, Federico Cedelli and Stefano de Blasi, who they were making Antinori's Tignanello and Solaya. So they come from really, really famous winemaking backgrounds. And so that was the Chianti. She was the Chianti. And then this is the wine from Montalcino. I want to show you, this is pretty funny because when I was interviewing somebody on the radio show when I was doing that, who was a producer in Montalcino, and they were saying, so all the dots are wineries, and he was saying, oh, the best grapes are from the south here in Montalcino, and really actually this is the warmest area. So it might have been that way, when they were adding substantial amount of plantings. But nowadays, what's really thought of as the primo area is this area just north of Montalcino, and there's a hilltop there, and that is called Montosoli Hill. So that's the Montosoli Hill, and that's where this wine is coming from, the Capana producer. So anyway, the more you love a certain region, the more you kind of delve into what producers are, what even the subregion of the DOC is. So this is Capana's cellars. All of their wine is aged in large botti. So there is a trend to be having a more modern style where they age their grapes, the wine in small barrels or barrique, and you get a little bit more oak presence, and you get a little bit more oxygenation, and so the wines tend to have a little bit more of a modern style. And Capana is really the classic style of Montalcino. And I think that's all for the slides. Any there's always just so much to cover, and so I hope I didn't go through things too fast, but I know I always like to have give you more information than less and tone it down. That way, like something can trigger and you can remember it and be like, oh, that guy was talking about that at one point. So any questions, or what did you guys think about the two Sangioveses?
Why don't we see who liked the let's do the head to head. Who preferred the Chianti over the who preferred the Chianti? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the Montalcino. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, that's a pretty. That looks like a tie to me. Of course, I can't see people who aren't.
It was not a tie.
Christine broke the tie. I just saw her little thumbs up there. So it looks like the Montalcino won that one. And then how about on the dry Riesling, the Guntram or the Dr. Herman? So Guntram.
Pick up your Dr. Herman.
1, 2, 3.
Really, he
4.
likes that.
And Dr. Herman. Mark, you can't pick both.
That's what I was cracking up.
Okay, wait, Dr. Herman. Oh, wait, we lost. Wait, we just.
Dr. Herman, for sure.
Okay, so, yeah, Dr. Herman won that one. Okay. Wow, I was on the losing team for both of those.
I have a Montalcino. It's a Brunello, but it's a Montalcino from Lucini, and I like it a lot. But I also have a Sangiovese from Alexander Valley, which I actually like better. So, but I'm a more Sonoma
Yes.
type.
And Pat, the Sangiovese that's coming out of Sonoma is really, really interesting. It tends to be a little bit more opulent and fruit forward. But I find Sangiovese, the Italians are like, oh, it has to be from, this region or that region. But I think, Sonoma is making excellent Sangiovese. You've got also in the Rogue Valley of Oregon. So Southern Oregon is making tremendous. I'm looking to Southern Oregon for Sangiovese big time.
Yeah.
So what are you drinking, Pat?
I'm drinking a Foley Sonoma, which it's a Bill Foley. It used to be a woman who, what was her name?
Courtney. Oh, before.
Oh, actually, she came down.
Record Sonoma.
Yeah, she came down and was
Yes, Courtney was our featured winemaker for the barbecue.
Yeah, Courtney.
Yeah.
But
And HEB is going to do a thing with her next month for women winemakers.
Oh, great. Okay. But Foley is, buying, I don't know. He just bought Ferrari Carano. He's bought everything.
Yeah.
He just sold his spirits company to
Southern Glaciers.
Yeah. And so they're going to handle, now his wines will be available everywhere now because they're the distributor now. So they make that side of the company really makes some nice wines.
Yeah, Bill actually bought a winery that was in our portfolio. He bought Mount Difficulty in New Zealand in the Central Otago, and so then we lost the distribution rights to them because then they got combined with the Foley family wines.
Right.
Yeah.
That's how it goes.
Yeah.
All right, so why don't we do our last sip, and hopefully you all have thought about some big takeaways, whether they're educational or anecdotal or anything else. I'll start. I have a couple. First off was the whole sensory discussion, Mark, which completely blew my mind. And when I smelled my wine and put my eyes up to the ceiling, I literally couldn't smell it. I don't understand why that is, but that blew my mind. And then Julie also, who has blown my mind twice tonight. I love you mentioned this in the comments earlier, the Keep on Truckin' temporary tattoos, which was a great way to identify a dry Riesling. I mean, I want one of those. So that was really funny.
I missed that.
Yeah, that was hilarious. I thought that was
It would be with a dancing bear.
I always learn an amazing amount of new stuff when Mark gives one of these classes.
I mean, the real question here
great.
is there
We
anything,
really appreciate it.
Mark is the bestest. We love Mark.
yeah, is there anything Mark doesn't know is what I want to know, because I mean, you know, you have your slides there, and so part of me is like, oh, he prepared for this, but then you start spouting off other things that are completely unrelated in other languages, and that's when I'm just like, oh my god.
I mean, you know,
Yeah, I was blown away by the eye level affecting the taste. I tried it too. It's like, oh my God, this is so weird. So yeah, definitely learned something new on that one.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to geek out about that stuff, the guy who has done, he's a master sommelier who has done a lot of work in tandem with cognitive scientists and you know, brain scientists and whatnot. His name is Tim Gazer, and probably one of the more intellectual master sommeliers, and really doing like lifetime studies. And I think he has like you can see like some videos of him talking about like what we were talking about. The eyes to the top is kind of like a fun party trick, but there's like, but there's a lot of other really interesting weird stuff that the brain associates your eye position with certain things that you perceive. So I will say though, one of the most important things that no matter how much you learn about wine, you always have to stay humble, that there's way more to learn, way more, and to never have it be afraid to admit that you didn't know that. There's just no way to know it all. So so anyway, that's that.
Hillary, do you have your last sip?
I do. And Christine just asked a question in the chat. Are there any US dry Rieslings you would recommend? And kind of when we were starting, before the class really got off, Mark was saying Forge Cellars in the Finger Lakes are amazing. So I wrote that down because I don't know about them. And so that answers Christine's question. And that's something that I learned. And then this is something kind of funny and silly, but when Mark was talking about Patton, he revealed his New Jersey accent, and I'm from Jersey too. So I felt like, oh, he's saying Patton, and that's like mountain, or we just like, we kind of drop that, we kind of like roll over that Patton, and it's Patton. And that was fun for me because I know that Mark's from New Jersey, so.
Right. That's funny. I mean, and it might not come out if I weren't here. You know, if I weren't here in New Jersey, it might not come out. But like, you know, open the drawer and get, or open the draw and get out of the gutter is the, you know.
We
Go
hear,
get some
we
water.
hear-
Yeah, water.
Yes. Roar. Okay, who else? Pat and Diana, what are your big takeaways for tonight?
I did mine, but
Yeah, and Pat took mine. I mean, mine is like, if Mark is the educator, I'm taking the class,
Yeah.
period. He's my favorite. And bring back that wine and cheese thing that he did a couple years ago.
So nice, Diana. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a last sip. I have a takeaway. So the Riesling section in our cellar has been like, we go buy it and there's those long pointy bottles and you go, oh, I don't want any of that stuff. And I don't buy any of it because I'm uncomfortable, because every time I buy it, I get the wrong one. So I feel a little bit more confident now, and I'm ready to go give it another shot, especially with the Dr. Herman. So I'm going to go load up on some Dr. Herman, and we'll have some Riesling that we can actually approach.
That's great. Yeah. And Jeff, go for the GGs. You know, there's fun stuff. Actually, Dr. Herman, I love this dry wine, but he's actually really famous more for his sweet wines, which is a whole thing. Well, no, but he's actually the, there's no other winemaker. So he has more 95 plus point wines from Spectator. He has the most out of any winemaker. He's the highest scoring 90 number of wines that have achieved 95 plus, but it's because he makes some really high acclaimed sweeter wines that are like the, you know, when you talk about like Ausleses and Trockenbeeren Ausleses and ice wines, like he is the creme de la creme. But this is the only dry wine that he makes, and I love it. So I'm glad you liked it.
Okay, we'll do the GGs, and that section of long pointy bottles, it's not going to be the place that we feel bad about. We're gonna get some good stuff in there. Thank
Cool. Great to hear.
Okay, so my tip is merchant. If you look on their sales section, always look for the pointy bottles because people don't appreciate Riesling. And so you can get like 93, 94, 94 5-point wines on their little clearance carts that they put out for like 30 and 40 bucks.
It's true. And I've had that conversation with John a lot actually. And I'm like, you know, he's like, I can't not buy them. And then he ends up discounting them.
But then people like us come and vacuum them up. We're like, oh, I see you have a Billy Schaefer there. I think we'll take all of those. But hey, Mark, I know you talked about GG, but there's Gold Cap as well, right? Within Mosel and Riesling.
Yeah. So that's a good point. So the gold capsule is kind of like the indication that it's like their special wine. Like it's the wineries, one of the wineries like flagship. So but typically, you know, they will not, it's not necessarily dry. It's just their like flagship. So whereas, you know, GG would be always dry if that's, you know, your cup of tea. If not, if you like dry and sweet and high quality Riesling in general, yeah, if you will see like a gold capsule, and you will actually see, typically it says gold capsule on it, and it's their like creme de la creme.
So my other question is, one really good pairing we found for Riesling is Thai food. Do you have other pairings that you like for Riesling?
I mean, so any sort of level of sweetness does really well with spiciness. So if you have sweetness and you have acid, which is all what Riesling is about, it likes spiciness. I think Riesling and Mexican food is amazing. I also think Riesling and with a little bit of sweetness and barbecue, like barbecue brisket, actually, it's an odd, it wouldn't think about it, but like the slight sweetness can cut through the amount of pepper. And so like really full-bodied, high-quality Riesling and barbecue. It's kind of the same concept of rosé and brisket. Yeah, we definitely Thai all day and Mexican food. I mean, I'm just really surprised that there's not a. I guess you could make an argument for the McGuire Mormon barbecue place, but then they moved all to American. I'm just surprised that there's not like, you know, a really good barbecue and wine list menu, not that I can really think of, as well as Mexican food. I mean, I would love to do like a Mexican and wine tour, you know, just because, you know, Mexican food and is so much more vast than just pairing it with beer. I hate that. It's like, hey, okay, you might have a lovely time with Mexican food and beer, but like there's also the breadth of Riesling and other grapes is amazing. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, guys. If whoever has to jet, thanks. Great seeing y'all.
Yeah, and we did a tasting with Moxie a few weeks back that was tacos and wine pairings, and that was fantastic. You know, great new experience for everyone. And the other thing I'll say about dry Rieslings is just that, I mean, I feel like, you know, we had a meeting with the foundation last week, and I feel like 80% of the people showed up with a dry Riesling in their glass on the Zoom. And if you do anything with Joelle Cousins, who has hosted many of our tastings and is now on our board, I mean, that's her favorite wine, and she will talk all day about how great they can be and also how easy they are to pair. I mean, that was a big part of what she talked about recently, is that just there's almost nothing that doesn't go with a dry Riesling. So I think we're going to see a lot more of those. Who else do we have that wants to talk about their big takeaways?
So I'll say, in addition to the eye position and olfaction, which was really wild, I learned that the R is known for Pinot Noir. And I think I need to find one of those and check it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're wild. So actually, the story about Pinot Noir in Germany is that and it's called Spätburgunder in Germany. And there was actually about half and half Pinot Noir and Riesling in the Mosel in the 1700s. And there was a king that basically mandated that all Pinot Noir in the Mosel was pulled out. But that didn't happen in the R. And so, there's not too many producers that you can find here, but they are fantastic. I would highly recommend it. Love the R. And it's it is like, the best pirate joke, like what's a pirate's favorite Pinot Noir region? The R.
It rhymes, so you remember it. Who else? Victoria, the Turners, Julie, anyone have any other takeaways? Sergio?
Yeah. Cool. I absolutely love Brunello di Montalcino. It's one of my favorite wines in the world, so much so that I drank 3/4 of the bottle of Rosso last night just to make sure it was okay. But I didn't understand the 1 year difference between the Reserva. So that was really cool. That was like nerdy, geeking out. But then my other thing is, like you said, you're the only person that likes maps. Well, I'm going to challenge you to that, Mark.
Ooh.
So I have, in Australia, I'm in America obviously now, but at home I have 2 maps that are of the north of Bone and the south of Bone, and the size of them is about 2 by 5 foot each.
Yeah.
And it goes through every little vineyard, and I'm sure many people here have seen them, or if they've been to Bone and collected them and got them beautifully framed. And I geek out when I get my wine and I look exactly where it is and I try to find, and that's how I associate. So maps, I loved. I took a photo of a few that you had up. So.
Great. Yeah, I got for my birthday that exact same map that you're talking about, framed in I think it was 2010. But yeah, I mean it's amazing. I mean, it helps you relate to a place,
Yeah, it connects.
Yeah, good, great to hear that.
So I was just going to say, besides obviously the train your brain thing, which now I get to say I'm in training when I'm drinking wine. I like this class was a no-brainer for me because these are actually 2 of my favorite types of wines, but they're ones that I probably drink the least because I just they obviously here I drink a lot of domestic, and they just don't kind of bubble up, I guess. And I struggle sometimes with finding Rieslings that I like, but if it's a Riesling I like, it's amazing. So I just was really excited for this class, and it did not disappoint.
Great.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Julie. Who else? Anyone have any other big takeaways you want to share? No? Well, this was really fun. I'm glad we did this because I think we got some really fun stuff out at the end, and got everyone to share their, big takeaways and some really fun thoughts from today. This was a fantastic theme. I'm so grateful, Mark, for the idea, and the head-to-head competition. I think is such a great way to really train your brain and think about those things. And so I think we all learned a lot today. So thank you, Mark, and thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. Please check out our website and our social media for upcoming tastings, and register. We've got some good ones coming up, and look forward to seeing you all real soon.
and we're gonna do a ridiculous events when we can all get together and see each other in person, right? Yeah.
Cheers to that.
Cheers.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, y'all. Pleasure. So good to see y'all. I miss everybody.
Bye, guys.